Hey everybody, Ryan here. I'm coming at you with a new series, and this is a series where I'm going to invite friends and other YouTubers onto the show to just kind of have a little discussion about film. And of course, you've heard me say in the past that I'm really good friends with Raz Man's Reality and Robbie Webster. These are two guys that have, really helped me out on YouTube. And so my first guest today is the Raz Man from Raz Man's Reality on YouTube and the Raz Man's Reality Radio Show. How are you, Raz? Welcome to the show.
I'm good, man. How are you doing? Thanks for having me,
I'm
and
doing
I'm glad.
awesome. I'm really excited that you're on the show today. I've really looked forward to one of these kind of videos for a long time, and who better to start it out?
Well, I appreciate that, man. Robbie and I have kind of a running joke about being your surrogate YouTube brothers or fathers or whatever you want to call it because we really help keep you motivated. So it's cool to have that come full circle. And I really feel honored with this series because you told me off the air that it was completely inspired by what I do on the radio show. So I really appreciate that.
Exactly. And for those of you on my channel that have not heard of Raz or not subscribed to him, please subscribe to him. He's awesome. And Raz, if you want to go ahead and give a little description of what you do and all that jazz.
Oh yeah, sure, I can do that. The way it started for me was I started in high school radio as the Raz Man and doing the Raz Man's Reality. And then a few years after that, we in Dayton had these things called hotlines, which is basically just a phone voicemail number that we used like an independent radio station. So I did that for a while. And then when we no longer had the financial money to keep that going, I was looking for a new way to do it. And that's when I found YouTube. And the people on YouTube who really inspired me to sort of know what I wanted to do with the Raz Man's Reality were the collectors, the film collectors that I saw on YouTube, mainly Robbie being one of the first, and UVM being the other first, and then the main guy as far as the format of the Raz Man's Reality and knowing that it was going to work and being presented like an independent television program was Zara Rack, because the Multimedia Chronicles was essentially what I'd done with the Raz Man's Reality for years on my own, just under a different name, hosted by a different guy. So once I saw that and had the fortune of having him be a good friend of mine and be there for me the way that I've been there for you, it was just all the motivation I needed to get going. And it took a while to get the show to the level to where it is now, but it's all just an ongoing process, which is what I've told you ever since your beginning, is that if you don't
Definitely.
feel like your show is where it needs to be, just keep going, because eventually it'll fall into place. And now I think it definitely has for you. You're finally there as far as where you want your end of things to be. And then the way the radio show came about, the new version, was a subscriber friend of mine, DJ Bob Runkle, invited me to be on his show, and then his station manager heard the show and the interview, and said, turn this into a radio show. And so I did. And from there it got picked up by a second station, audio graded. And audio graded, the audience on there became so big that it became syndicated on iTunes. And through the association with audio graded, we also got sponsorship by geek-e.com. So that's basically everything and where it stands right now with me and how I got where I'm at. And what this show basically is just me being a geek. Same as you.
Yeah. Well, it's fun being a geek, and it's just really cool because, like, I've known you for about over a year now since I just passed my 1 year being on YouTube, and I've actually seen that kind of transformation from YouTube to the radio show. I remember when you first told me about it, I was really pumped, and it's actually really awesome how much it's blossomed into a success.
Yeah,
And
it is. The radio show.
I hope it continues to grow.
Yeah, I hope it continues to grow too. And it's almost to the point to where it's bigger than the YouTube end of things. Not to discount the YouTube end of things, because that's my built-in audience, and I would never, have a bad thing to say about them. But I'm hearing feedback from people I've never met on the radio side of things. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's because when you hit radio, it's like a whole new medium, and I mean, you get people that aren't really associated with YouTube, but they might get introduced to your YouTube channel because of what you say on your radio show. And so,
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's awesome. It's really awesome. I really hope that all my subscribers go and check out your radio show and go check out your YouTube channel if they haven't yet. But since this is a cinema-related show, I have to ask you, what are a few films that you've, I guess you could say, started out your film-loving life that really inspired you?
Well, I tell you, for me, it's always the very first memory I have of film, and this is so weird to say this because I'm 32 right now, and this film is a rated R film, which meant that my dad did something he technically wasn't supposed to do back when I first saw it. But I saw Blade Runner when I was about 6 years old. And of course, the one scene I didn't see because my dad is a Christian man, so he covered my eyes during the boob scene, so I didn't see that. But everything else in the film I was completely exposed to at a very young age. And I just remember that it was one that just stuck with me. And I was like, I had no idea that film could do that, because I was a big sci-fi freak ever since I was a little kid. I was so into Star Wars and Star Trek, and I would sit there glued to the television every week for Star Trek. And so Blade Runner back in '86 was one of the first brand new films that came out, and I saw it in the theater, and that was my first experience of sci-fi on a big screen, so that one really stuck with me. And then the other ones that I point back as far as inspiration goes is E.T., which I think is one that everyone can say that about, seeing that film. Back to the Future, the trilogy, another one that everyone can relate to. And the last one was Field of Dreams, because sports is a big love of mine, and I just love the sentiments as far as the sports aspect of that film, and then the idea of sports just being a backdrop of it, and it really being a heart-wrenching story and a life story. It was the first film that I had seen that had so many levels in it, where it was, you think it's about one thing, and it turns out being about something else entirely. So all of those films sort of inspired me to know what film could be about, and from there is when I started being exposed to the iconic directors, the Kubricks, the Hitchcocks, on and on and on. So,
well, it's really funny that you mentioned Blade Runner and E.T., Field of Dreams, and the Back to the Future movies, because they all have, just from me thinking about it, they all have one thing in common. And not only is it sci-fi, but there's a magic with those films, like about making the human mind, I guess you could say, young again in a way. Not necessarily Blade Runner, even though it makes your mind think and it's a really creative movie, but especially the other three, they bring out the youth in you as you watch them. I know E.T., every time I watch it, I'm like, man, I feel like a little kid again. Everywhere from the camera angles, it's all about the perception of what the kid feels like and, what his emotions are. And Back to the Future is kind of the same thing. It's something that a kid would love to do. And Field of Dreams, I mean, we could do an entire video on that film. That movie is just a straight up sports masterpiece.
Yeah, I've done an entire video on Field of Dreams. It's in my Life Changers in Film and Television series playlist if anybody wants to go through my playlist and check that out. And I've also done a 4-parter on Blade Runner and a solo review for a group channel that I used to be on called The Cigarette Burns, which was a film review channel. And I don't want to really put it out there too much, but I'm throwing around the idea of restarting a film group review channel with you and Robbie and a few other people, but it's not set in stone yet. There are a few things we need to figure out, so we don't really have a timeline for that, but if it happens, definitely stay tuned to both our channels, because we're going to be talking about that big time.
Well, that's awesome. I'm excited just thinking about that, and all the ideas and everything involved. If you need any help, just let me know.
Yeah, well, because, we talked about it through the radio show and through this series. I feel like the biggest thing about YouTube and the biggest blessing for YouTube is that it might start with one passion, but it's through those passions that you develop connections and friendships like this. And I think that that's what people need to know and be more exposed to, that YouTube isn't just about turning a camera on and making a video. It's about connections and friendships and group channels and group videos and group collaborations on audio, which is what I do. Any of that on any level is about showcasing that connection. And the more of that I can do, the better off I think YouTube is for it, in my opinion.
Yeah. That's another subject that I really wanted to bring up today, which I haven't really had a chance to tell you about yet because it just happened yesterday. Yesterday, for some of you guys who keep up with my reviews and stuff, I just reviewed a film called Wages of Fear. It's a Criterion film, and I started thinking, yesterday I was running some errands, and I started thinking about what would happen if there was no such thing as companies like Criterion or Janus Films that really brought out and distributed all these foreign international films that inspired Spielberg, all these other directors. Like, what would happen if they weren't even there? Would we even have Spielbergs and stuff like that? And my wife, we were talking about it, and she said something that really, really kind of stuck out to me. And it really made me think, wow, that was, that's it. And she was like, well, the thing is that people back then, they were forward thinkers. They thought about what needed to happen to continue the quality of film and to get people inspired. And so all these companies came about, and they made sure that happened. And I started thinking, and I was like, that's the problem with film today, is that nobody's a forward thinker. It seems like the entire industry is about, bad quality films that cost $200 million to make. And I just wanted to get your input on that whole situation.
Well, I completely agree with you 100%. And the only three guys that I think are exceptions to the rule are David Fincher, Christopher Nolan, and J.J. Abrams. I think those three guys are absolutely forward thinkers because they were inspired by all the people that you and I are inspired by and that we're talking about today. But most of the modern day filmmakers, and Peter Jackson would be another one. I kind of left Tim out, but he just popped into my head. But I think all the other modern filmmakers today have just had it too easy. It's just so easy to pick up an HD camera and go and shoot and think, oh, well, that makes a good film because it was easy and quick to do. And they see something that somebody else did, and they're like, okay, well, that's how I make a film. I just make my own interpretation of that. They don't sit down and try to come up with their own idea and their own way of doing things. They sort of stifle their creativity. And that is the biggest problem with film and television, is that there isn't enough originality. All of it is reality-based or based off something that someone else did. There's nothing original. The main exceptions to it are shows by J.J. Abrams, who we just talked about, and The Big Bang Theory,
Yeah.
which anyone that's watched my channel lately knows that I am absolutely now obsessed with that show and trying to get you to check it out. And I know that you say you're going to check it out really soon, which I can't wait to see. But, yeah, with the exception of shows like that, you're absolutely right. Everyone's lazy and no one has any originality. And that is why film is in the shape it's in. And I think it's so important for people like us, especially with the medium that we have here, to have the younger generation be educated the right way. I always said that a true film buff shares his passion because he wants to educate. And he wants the generation behind him to know what makes a good film and what doesn't make one.
Yeah, and like I said before, I guess I should rephrase. I guess not everybody isn't a forward thinker, but I mean, all you gotta do is look every week at what movies are released, and everything is a remake or something. And I was looking on on IMDb this week, and I saw that they're interested in remaking the Alfred Hitchcock classic Rebecca, and I just started thinking, how awesome would it be if instead of remaking these things, they put them back into the cinemas? Even if it was for a limited time, but like, the way to get people into the classic films is to show the classic films. I mean, to be honest with you, I just think that's so much a better idea. I mean, it's just, I can't stand all the remakes that are going on. If I ever found out that they're going to remake like Citizen Kane or The Godfather or any Stanley Kubrick film, I don't know what I'm going to do. I mean, I'll just freak out.
Well, to me,
but like,
when I talk about remakes, the thing I always say to people is there's a difference between a remake and a reimagining. A remake is just a verbatim telling of the same story, which no one wants to see, because 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be as good direction-wise and acting-wise as the original. And that's what we're getting a lot of in cinema, is remakes. Reimaginings, however, are something entirely different. And one of the best examples of a reimagining that I can think of is The Parent Trap from 1998. The 1998 version of The Parent Trap, starring Lindsay Lohan, is a far better film, in my opinion, than the 60s version starring Haley Mills, because it was a reimagining and it wasn't as limited, and the way they get the parents together is more realistic, and the way they meet up is more realistic than it was in the original film. In other words, they had the basis for the story, but they wrote their own story and wrote their own script and gave it the same title. That is what you need to do.
Exactly.
Is do a reimagining and not a remake.
Exactly. And I mean, that actually is a really good example, because it's a simple example. I mean, when you think of stuff like this, you don't necessarily always think of The Parent Trap or anything like that. You always think of Planet of the Apes, which is the Tim Burton version that he tried to reimagine the whole thing. It just was a flop. But Parent Trap actually was a very good film. I actually also prefer it over the original. I didn't really care for the original at all, to be honest with you. Alright, well, that was a fun-filled episode. We got a lot of great discussions in, and so I don't make the video super long, because I know some of you guys might think, 30 or 45 minutes, which we can do a 45-minute video, is too long. I just really wanted to go ahead and just thank Raz for being here, and it was awesome. It was a pleasure talking to you, having this conversation, and I hope that you guys really enjoyed this kind of show, because if you guys really love it, I'm going to continue this and have, invite people on, and Raz is definitely going to come back, and we will continue this entire conversation, talk about whatever. And thank you very much, Raz, for being on the show. And for you guys that are, really liking our conversation, you got to make sure you sub him. I know I've said it a couple other times in the video, But sub him, listen to his radio show. There's different ways to listen to his radio show, so you can't
Yeah.
tell me that you don't listen to the radio or anything like that. There's so many ways you could listen to it. If you have an iPhone, I mean, just look on iTunes, and Raz will be able to tell you a little bit more about. He told you a little bit more about that, but there's a lot of ways you could listen to it. So
Yeah, basically the easiest way, Ryan, to keep up with everything I do is just like my Facebook fan page.
with that, I'm gonna go ahead and let Raz do a special sign off.
And in addition to YouTube and the radio show, there's also geek-e.com, which is not only the sponsor for my radio show, but now I'm able to simulcast any full episode of the Raz Man's reality in video form on there as well. So you guys can check me out there. As always, there's no such thing as being too big of a geek. And this is reality according to the Raz Man. And Raz Man style is not just a catchphrase, but a way of life.
And don't forget, there's 3 ways of doing things: the right way, the wrong way, and the chat way. See you guys.